Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Baron Orr. I'm the lead scientist for the UNCCD. If I start this conversation sounding like I've been in a contact group for the last 30 hours, you will know that is true. So I have to switch and go from that grind to something that's a lot more interesting, which is this session. This is the heartbeat of the entire Science Day, which was created in concept by Jean-Luc Schott from the SPI and joined by Mariam Akhtar-Schuster and Annette Cowie, who conceptually put this together in collaboration with our communications team. And it's really a central thing because the man I'm going to introduce you to now, Executive Secretary Ibrahim Diaw, he views communication as science as two hands shaking, basically, that everything that we do should eventually turn into communication that goes from top all the way to the bottom and back up again. And that's important. It means that we're ensuring we've got a scientific foundation for what we do. Well, the only way to make that really happen is full engagement with the scientific community. And the global process right now is to do that through intergovernmental panels, intergovernmental bodies. And we are lucky enough that they are so interested in the challenges of land, climate, biodiversity, that they've agreed to join us here. The key authors of these major reports that have been coming out are going to follow Ibrahim. And on that note, I would welcome Ibrahim and all of you to the Rio Convention's Pavilion Science Day. Thank you.
Thank you, Baron. Good afternoon, everybody. Baron, thank you very much. Baron is not only a lead scientist, but actually a very good colleague and a good friend. And when good friends prepare your briefing points, they give you a kilometer-long text. So I have summarized it into 100 meters. So please bear with me. Bringing science and policy together is a lot like trying to mix oil and water. It seems to be impossible. Science is reductionist. It reduces complex phenomena into fundamental parts. Scientists are always testing hypotheses, calculating probabilities, and reporting uncertainties. Policy making, on the other hand, is all about synthesis, combining elements to try to form a coherent whole. In the real world, neither science nor policy making can provide a cut and dried truth. Miguel de Cervantes, the Spanish novelist, once wrote, truth will rise above falsehood as oil above water. The truth is we need a good mix. So how do we mix oil and water? But by adding emulsifier, a bit like when mustard and mayonnaise is added to a vinaigrette. The emulsifier, in our case, is the assessment and translation of scientific knowledge into policy-relevant language that can really inform policy development. Effectively designed and managed assessments encourage the co-production of knowledge. It is an iterative and collaborative process. Scientists, a wide range of stakeholders and policymakers are all involved. This segment of the Rio Convention Pavilion Science Day brings together 4 major scientific assessments on land conducted over the past 2 years. I am delighted to welcome the IPCC. Anybody from the IPCC? The IPBES, the IRP, the International Resources Panel, the EU's JRC. I welcome all of you to these discussions. It also involves GEO, the global partnership of governments and organizations promoting the transformation of Earth observations into knowledge. It is an incredible lineup of speakers, but this segment also involves you, independent scientists, policymakers, and other stakeholders. And I'm very sure that you'll all have your own recipe for a good vinaigrette. To my mind, the best scientific assessments are characterized by quality, consistency, independence, and impartiality, as well as transparency and openness. And the best interface between science and policy involves a space like this, for open deliberation where a diverse and representative mix of stakeholders can engage and help put good science to work. But let's hear from you in a dynamic and interactive way. I do not need to tell any of you how important putting these major scientific assessments to work is for the environment and for people. The next 2 hours will fill in any gap you may have. And more importantly, I hope the discussions lead to productive outcomes that support all of your work. I look forward to these outcomes, and I thank you all for helping to build a solid scientific foundation for the policies of the UNCCD. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibrahim. I think that sets the tone that we're looking for. And so now I'd like to bring up to the stage Jean-Luc Schott, who is the SPI member that actually sat down next to Ibrahim in a meeting and said, wouldn't it be a good idea to have a science day at COP14, which is why we're here today. Jean-Luc?
Thank you, Baron. It's not also an easy task to take the floor after, the Executive Secretary of UNCCD, and also I will do my best. What I would like to say before, we are there because of the collective work done by SPI with the strong support of the Secretariat. Without that, collective work, it would be impossible. My statement will be short according to this specific session. The obvious needs of synergy and convergence have been put in front line many times in many arenas. The adoption of SDG has reinforced this priority. Here in New Delhi, we have also taken note of recommendation of parties and the will of participants to move forward on this transformative pathway. The side events I have attended so far are echoing this need. Convergence and synergy are the heart of this session. So, sharing the knowledge between us, action between us, will shape and help shaping the priority being addressed to the policy. Thanks a lot. I will leave the floor to the speakers. Thanks, Baron.
So the way that they framed this program is to think big, to think about all of the goals that the world has set upon itself to achieve sustainable development, which of course is the SDG process. And the IRP, recognizing the importance of land and the importance of trying to do something right now, and the reality that you're going to hear about from IPBES and IPCC about how we're basically running out of land in terms of its transformation, they wanted to take a look at the relationship between restoration and each of those SDGs. And they wanted to do it fast, in snapshots, accessible language. They call it a think piece. And with that, I introduce Jeff Herrick, representing the IRP.
Thank you, Baron. And I would like to note that I, like Baron, have been immersed in the negotiation side of the convention, and I am absolutely thrilled to step out of that role. I stand before you representing the 27 co-authors of the report, and not, I repeat, and not as a representative of the United States government. So for the next couple of hours, I look forward to stepping back into my normal role as a scientist. So thanks very much. So the International Resource Panel is a panel organized in a similar way to the IPCC and to IPBES, with some slight differences in governance and the way that our reports are developed and then approved. We actually do not. The main differences with those two panels is that we do not actually have negotiated summary for policymakers. So we do have a political steering committee. It plays a very significant role in governance, but it does not actually approve the reports. Having said that, all of our reports do go through an extensive both scientific and political review process throughout their development. And so effectively, we integrate both types of perspectives into the development of our reports. Our flagship report is the Global Resource Outlook, which you see here. And it essentially represents a synthesis, a regular synthesis of the results of all of our reports. And the International Resource Panel, because it focuses on sustainable consumption and production, essentially needs to address an extraordinarily wide range of issues, including land. And so the report I'll be discussing here today is part of our land theme, but for those of you who are interested, we deal with minerals, we deal with mineral governance, we deal with recycling, we deal with energy, we deal with cities, and a wide variety of other issues. And all of those come together in the Global Resource Outlook. Our primary goal is to inform the discussion of how to decouple economic growth and increases in human well-being from environmental degradation, as illustrated in this slide. This report represents the first cooperation between the UNCCD and the IRP as reflected in these decisions. And as I said, I'd like to step out of the decision mode, so I'm going to skip quickly ahead. I can provide links to these. The report that I'm sharing with you today follows an earlier report that is also relevant to the work of the UNCCD, but did not involve the UNCCD, that looked at land evaluation as a tool for land use planning, as a tool for targeting investments in land degradation neutrality, although at the time this report was developed, that was not a primary focus, but it is equally relevant. So the report we are releasing today, and is available on the Resource Panel's website, which is resourcepanel.org, is a report that was designed specifically to review and assess the potential co-benefits as well as trade-offs of land restoration and rehabilitation for all of the SDGs. And during the next few minutes, I will share with you some of the key conclusions. Before we get to the conclusions, though, I would like to reiterate that this report is strongly embedded within the framework established by the Science Policy Interface, which essentially calls upon the scientific community and others who are involved in land restoration to recognize the primacy, in most cases, of avoiding land degradation, where that is not possible, reducing, and ultimately then, where necessary, restoring. The report, however, does focus on restoration and remediation, while recognizing that many of the messages are equally relevant to avoidance. The report consists of 5 sections, 5 chapters. The core of it is Chapter 3 or chapters 3.1 to 3.17 that actually go into some detail, although we did put fairly tight word limits on the authors. These are individual, essentially standalone chapters that range in length from about 1,500 to 2,500 words, so relatively short. And we do have 5 conclusions that are presented in the summary. The first being that land restoration and rehabilitation can have significant benefits for all the SDGs. And we ourselves were surprised, and we've been met with surprise when we make this statement, because previous reports have actually only looked at a subset of the SDGs. But in fact, once you start looking at them, you actually find that either the process of restoration or the restored land, and in some cases both, do in fact have significant co-benefits. The second conclusion is that the extent of the restoration co-benefits and the potential risks and trade-offs do vary widely among the SDGs and their respective targets. And this is reflected in the results of a survey. Essentially, the y-axis is the number of experts who believed that restored or rehabilitated land in this case, and there's a separate set of graphs for the process of restoring land, had very low to very high co-benefits or potential co-benefits for each of the SDGs. And you'll note a couple of things here. One is that there is a wide range for each of them. And that's important because it reflects not only uncertainty on the part of the scientific community, but also the wide variability depending on how restoration is carried out and where it's carried out. And this, we believe, is extremely important. The third conclusion is that the co-benefits of the restoration process are, in fact, often very much different than those of the restored land and often work at different temporal scales. So here we see seed harvesting occurring to capture the seed necessary for restoration. And here we see a restored landscape. There are obviously significant immediate employment benefits associated with the restoration process. The employment benefits may or may not come out of the restored land depending on what it's restored to and what it was previously being used for. So again, very different impacts of the process from the outcome. Number 4, quantitative and qualitative modeling, including scenario development at local to global scales, can help guide future investments. This is basically a call to the scientific community to provide a more structured framework to support decision making. And this is something that the SPI of the UNCCD is actively involved in. Conclusion, and we've essentially provided an example of where we've developed essentially a qualitative model that could in fact be parameterized, showing what the potential co-benefits of restoration are for a number of SDGs and how those might in fact impact migration and the impacts of migration, as just one example. Finally, number 5, an integrated landscape approach, including targeting research and investments, is key to increasing the total return on land restoration investments. This is covered extensively in Chapter 4, which was led by Sarah Scher and Eco-Agricultural Partners, and I think is well worth a look. It follows from the conclusions of the previous IRP report on land evaluation. So in conclusion, I would invite you to visit the website, share with us your thoughts on the report, and I look forward to working with this group in the future. Thank you. And I'm sorry, I will at this point acknowledge I have one copy of the report. The others are stuck in customs and may never make it out. I do have a few, for those that are interested, printed copies of the two-pager, but it is available on the website, so thanks.
Thank you very much, Jeff. For those of you that know a little bit about the UNCCD, you'll realize that we take a very different approach than the other conventions where it comes to monitoring land degradation. We take what today would be called an essential variables approach. We actually have very few indicators because land degradation, as all of you know, is manifest locally in very different ways. And well, it took them 20 years, the country parties, to agree how to monitor land degradation because of that problem. And so when they switched to an essential variables approach, they actually used the definition of the word indicator correctly. They're indicative. They give us a sense of what's going on, but it's not enough to just give us the sense. That helps us know, do we turn the ship a little bit this way or a little bit that way? But how do we know what's really going on? Well, the technique is called convergence of evidence, and we have Mikhail Shirley here from the JRC. He, Chuck Hutchinson, Jim Reynolds, and a number of other people put together what a colleague of mine, our information specialist and librarian, called the Book of the Century. Why? Why was it cited by IPES and IPCC? Because it's the most comprehensive, integral assessment of land degradation to date. And Mikhail will tell us all about it. Thank you.
Thanks. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and to present a few little aspects of the Atlas of the World Atlas of Desertification. If I would go through the Atlas, I'm standing on the podium here for more than 2 hours, so that would be much too long for now. So what was the objective, basically, of the Atlas, of making the Atlas? The objective was, okay, to provide an update on the mapping, on the challenge of mapping, and see what is possible for mapping land degradation. It's a successor of the two previous atlases. There was number 1 and number 2, published by UNEP in 1992 and 1997. They were based on the Glassot map, which illustrated soil erosion, was compiled by country experts. So 20 years later, or during 20 years, there was no update of the Atlas. So we didn't consider it in the end. When we took up the challenge, we all of a sudden realized that it was much more complex than we actually had thought it would be. So it became not fully a successor, if you want, of the previous two, but a little bit of rethinking and re-illustration of what is possible. Okay, so there were, of course, contemporaneously, we started long ago, but as I said, the challenge was very strong, so it took us some time to make up the mind, let's say, and get through all the mess of data, methodologies, and challenges. Contemporaneously, actually, a few other reports popped up, and you know them all, of course. We had contribution also in the Global Land Outlook, IPBES, the Climate Change IPCC report, which just came out, we have heard. These reports, of course, they list the long aspects of science and in very detailed texts. So they base themselves on observations, very many observations, to come to a number of generalized conclusions. That's what we call inductive reasoning. So, and you will see later on we adapted, let's say, the approach for the Atlas. Because the Atlas is, in theory, a collection of maps. So we had to provide maps. We have to tell the story of land degradation through maps. So what these other reports, what all the reports actually, and everybody agrees upon, of course, at the moment, is that humans drive global change processes. And that's a very fundamental issue. That's fundamental also in, let's say, the challenge of mapping the land degradation. Also, that land degradation is a local process, and we all know that, of course, but it has global repercussions, and that becomes, everybody knows that, but you have to prove it. You have to put it on paper, you have to put it, and of course, the Atlas a little bit, but reports such as the IPBES on biodiversity, the UNFCCC report on climate